This live program is proudly brought to you by
Assalamu alaikum once again. I'm your host Shafiq Morton, coming to you live from Oasis House, which is the home of the Oasis Group Holdings. This is ITV's budget special. Our guest this evening is CEO of Oasis Group Holdings, Mr. Adam Ibrahim. Assalamu alaikum once again to you on the show this evening.
Wa alaikum salam, Shafiq.
We've actually had a tweet from a viewer, and if you want to tweet ITV, it's at ITV_SA. The question goes as follows. Could you provide commentary on the input of the budget on the balance of payments, especially given the sharp acceleration in export growth?
I think Shafiq, thank you, it's a good question. I think the budget creates a framework for infrastructure spend that we spoke about, which encourages imports and exports. Theory makes our exports more efficient and more competitive, so we'll export more. And secondly, the Minister of Finance has actually indicated that they'll be spending a lot of effort on the customs, and they were collected so much more customs duty. And in South Africa we have another cancer where people actually import goods and services into the country without paying the relevant taxes and customs duty. And that makes it very difficult for South African companies to compete, because when we export to those countries we have to kind of pay the same taxes. So it's not a level playing field. And so what that will mean is if we do that efficiently and we collect our customs duties at the ports and the airports, it will mean that illegal imports will disappear, and that means that our balance of payments will improve and more of the goods and services will be manufactured in South Africa. Our unit labor costs will come down, we become competitive, more competitive, and it may actually lead us from people sending illegal goods to us. It may allow us not only to replace that, but to actually export. So net it creates a framework together with the weaker rand for our exports to move up very dramatically, for our imports to slow down quite nicely, and that means more of our economic growth is domestically sourced with South African jobs, and it creates a sustainable environment. In the short term, however, the balance of payments and the current account deficit will remain relatively large. I think it's expected to be, the current account deficit is expected to be about 5.8% over the next 3 years, compared to about 6.8%. While it's come down, I think it's still very high, and to some extent that is on part as a result of some of the capital expenditure that we're doing, but also as a result of these strikes. So the sooner we get rid of these strikes and the sooner we can come to a social accord, and we will actually reduce our risk very dramatically, and with the balance of payments moving positively, with the current account moving positively, and our national budget deficit shrinking, we will move out of that fragile 5 into the robust, rosy African dream. That's our dream.
That sounds nice, getting released from the fragile 5. Another viewer question I've got here is the issue of South African government expressing an interest in Sukuk or Islamic bonds. Now, the Sukuk is your field of expertise. What do you make of this government showing a commitment to the idea of Islamic investment? I mean, surely this is groundbreaking stuff.
Shafiq, it is, and I must compliment a couple of people. I must compliment my chairperson, Shaheen, who's my eldest brother, and my deputy chairperson and chief regulatory officer, Nazim, which is my middle brother, for their absolute dedication and hard work to putting the framework for Islamic regulations in South Africa, together with our friend Sheikh Yusuf de Lorenzo, who's on our Sharia board, and our friend Michael Macmillan, who's most probably one of the top lawyers in the world. They really put in 5 to 7 years of hard work, and alhamdulillah, that hard work has paid off, And finally, we have the unit trusts, the retirement funds, we have the pension funds, we can pay endowments, now tax incentivized savings, and we have the Murabba products, and now the Sukuk products. That actually completes the spectrum, and it allows not only Muslims in South Africa and globally to benefit from the South African dream and the African dream, but in the government level, so the government sukuk, but after this there'll be a series of corporate sukuks, so the Escoms and the Transnets and will come, and we'll be glad to participate in that. So at the moment this is a dollar sukuk, so it's for offshore investors, so our global income fund will invest in it, so indirectly our South African clients will invest in the global sukuk through our global fund. And that's the beauty of having a global business. And when the retail South African sukuk, domestic sukuk arrives, we'll play an active role in investing in that area. Remember, our income fund, which we launched on 1 October 2010, has done fantastically, providing sustainable, low-risk returns. It's a fantastic alternative to bank deposits and medium-term deposits. And firstly, it takes you out of riba. Secondly, we have daily liquidity at very competitive yields, and the sukuk just helps us. Now we invested in global sukuks, and we will invest in the South African sukuk, which just kind of helps make our country, our organization, our community more sustainable, and puts us from the global perspective, puts South Africa high up on the agenda on the Muslim world, because they now have another country that they can invest in sukuks. So the government will go around all these countries promoting South Africa, and it was not only, the 500 million is an important number, but the spin-off from that is just going to be immense domestically in South Africa for us as a community, but internationally I think it will lead to multiples of that flowing into this country and connecting us to the Muslim world. And not only the Muslim world, but it's going to connect us to places like the UK and the US, and we'll get a lot of positive publicity, inshallah.
Could you predict right now which particular countries might show an interest in South Africa now that we have this $500 million Islamic sukuk on offer?
Sure. The traditional countries, the Middle East, the Far East, Malaysia, Indonesia, and throughout the Middle East. But, if I tell you about the kind of interaction we're having with 3 or 4 of the largest Swiss financial institutions, 3 or 4 of the other large European financial institutions, 3 or 4 of the large UK financial institutions, and 3 or 4 of the large global institutions, I think it will actually, the demand will be very, very broadly based, and that demand will come from East, Middle East, all the way through to the US. And I think it's very good for our country.
Do you think that South Africa offering these Islamic sukuk, you say it now makes us a global player on a completely different level. How does this impact in Africa, though? I mean, Africa is very important to us. I mean, we are actually part of Africa. Is Africa the growing market in terms of Islamic finance, that particular model?
Yes, I mean, if you look at Africa, firstly, Muslims make up a big part of the population. So we need to provide alternatives for them. And part of that alternative is providing a full solution of Islamic product. But most of these countries, I mean, very fond and proud and to be aligned to Africa and part of Africa. And Africa is going to provide so much growth and stability for the next 20 years, inshallah. But it will need funding for its infrastructure. It will need funding for a lot of its development. And I think a lot of that funding will come from Sukuk funding. And that will be good because Muslims will be funding their own growth, their own homes, their own roads, their own dams, their own electricity with their own funding. And doesn't that make us sustainable? Doesn't make us so connected to the countries we live in? And doesn't make us feel so good that the income we earn is a halal income, The income we retire on is a halal income, and it kind of brings peace to the heart.
It certainly does. Another question that comes in from a viewer, it's not quite specific, but it says that Mr. Pravin Gordon spoke about retirement benefits. I'm not quite sure what the viewer is referring to, but what comes out of the budget in terms of retirement benefits?
There's a couple of things. I'll talk about retirement benefits, and then I'll talk about the whole financial service sector. Firstly, retirement benefits. One of the first things is that, we've been talking about retirement fund reform. So too many South Africans, they, change jobs so they can get their retirement fund money paid out, and then they use it on consumer goods, and then when they retire they don't have enough money, and then they're burdening the state. So the most important thing over the next couple of years, we will have compulsory preservation. The minister also said that there's 6 million South Africans that have no cover. And so he's talking about potentially mandatory retirement. So it's going to force every South African in employment to contribute to a pension plan. That would be fantastic. Again, it reduces the risk, it makes our economy more sustainable, and it makes our citizens able to retire with honor and dignity. Then thirdly, he raised the tax-free lump sum from 315,000 to 500,000. It's a big number.
It is.
So that's tax-free. So the tax burden on your retirement savings is much less, and at lower rates. So I think the framework is very good. We need to get out there and tell Muslims and all South Africans, save for your retirement, because the framework is good, and it will lead to a better quality of life in your later years. And then I think the thing that I'd like to say is the financial service industry, though, has got a lot to answer for. It most probably does missiles through things I've spoken about, credit life. Many South Africans have these funeral policies which are very expensive. But when you want to move your pension fund from one company to another, your insurance product from one company to another, your retirement annuity from one company to another, they make it almost impossible. They charge huge penalties. It's your money. It's your right. They're basically creating an opaqueness, and they're taking your civil liberties away from you and charging you an expensive fee for taking your civil liberties away from you. And that cannot be right. That is not in line with the South African budget. It is not in line with our democracy, which says freedom for all, transparency for all, and mobility for all. And what we need to do is we need to tell those big insurance companies, we demand you to give our pension funds without penalties, because we want to move it into a Sharia compliant way. We want our retirement annuities to be transferred without penalties, because that's in compliance with our obligation and our ethical obligation. We demand it as South Africans because we are a free nation. Don't hold us in bondage and charge us for bondage. Slavery is over. So that's the message I want to leave. That's a message that we need to become more activists as a community in a structured, professional way. And we, like the government has put the framework with the sukuks and allowed us to do these things, we now need to say, we've got those rights. We need to take ownership of those rights, and we need to get people to allow us to exercise our rights. So in a few weeks' time, few months' time, we'll be exercising our rights in the election. Let's exercise our right on Islamic finance by choosing the right alternative Sharia-compliant product with the right service providers in a cost-efficient way without penalties. You change your mind. We're allowed to change our mind. And if we change our mind, we shouldn't have a cost in changing our mind. Well, that's freedom. And financial services do not allow us to have freedom.
And let's hope that we do get those freedoms. But in the last 2 to 2.5 minutes, just very briefly, What is your sort of your concluding remarks about today's budget? I mean, there doesn't seem to be much criticism. People seem to be fairly satisfied with it. I mean, what's your take?
I think for 20 years, this government has delivered a fantastic framework of regulation and macroeconomic policy and fiscal policy that is transparent, open, and forward-looking, so that it's predictable. You can plan, you can have confidence in your plans, there's very few surprises, and we've got to compliment them. Very few countries and very few companies deliver on what their plans are consistent with the plans. So for 20 years, this government has been consistent, delivering the right framework, the right budget. It's creating an environment where South Africans can now truly feel that we've left nobody behind. It feels great that there's so many people getting grants, unfortunately, but they're getting grants. They're not going home hungry, so nobody's left behind. We need to educate them, and we need to create job opportunities. Secondly, it allows us to get to our true growth potential of 5-7%. A lot of that is within our own control, and Africa gives us a fantastic opportunity. And as Muslims, this is fantastic. We have the best environment anywhere in the world for any Muslim, from east, west, north, south. No other country creates the framework for Muslims to prosper and feel that they're part of the social structure, because we are. And I think we must just go out there and vote for the party that's brought it. And I think we all know what party that is. And we must not be mistaken and diverted by the silly games that the Pooh grade. You know, the other parties tell us we cannot have the same toilets in Bishop's Court and in Khayelitsha. That cannot be right. This budget says that is not South Africa. The South Africa that this budget and the budgets for 20 years has put in place, this is a lovely country for all of us, inshallah. May we all prosper.
Ameen. And Adam Ibrahim, CEO of the ASIS Group, shukran jazilan for chatting to us. And this evening you have been listening to an ITV budget special coming to you live from Oasis House, which is the home of Oasis Group Holdings. We've been talking about the budget delivered today by Minister Pravin Gordhan, his 5th budget. Will he be there next year? Well, we'll find out this time next year, won't we? And from myself, Shafiq Morton, for the last time tonight, your ITV budget special coming to you live from Oasis House, the home of Oasis Group Holdings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
This live program is proudly brought to you by